up, an episode of America's Hidden Stories explores the Osage murders of the 1920s. A historic Colorado River agreement has been reached by tribes and states. Plus, our collaboration with Underscore News explores mental health in the Pacific Northwest. I'm Malia Chavez. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
Hopa. Thank you for joining us. We start in Minnesota, where a bill about Native American mascots appears to be in the final stages of becoming a law. The bill, which passed both the State House and Senate last week, would ban the use of Native American mascots and nicknames for public schools in the state starting in July. If the bill is successful, Minnesota would be the 9th state to enact a legal ban on this issue. It is a battle that goes back to the 1960s, and there are at least 7 schools resisting. The legislation is now awaiting a signature from Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. It is not immediately clear to ICT what the stance is of the state's lieutenant governor and White Earth Ojibwe citizen Peggy Flanagan. Well, the fate of Native-led productions is unknown as writers are on strike. The Writers Guild of America is on strike over poor working conditions, low pay, and their limited benefits for streaming content. Last month, members from the Writers Guild voted in favor of striking by over 97%. Some of those members include Indigenous writers who have already been occupying the picket lines, including Janice Schmeeding, Brian Bahi, and Ty LeClaire. Sierra Teller Ornelas, co-creator of Rutherford Falls, says the strike could last months, but believes writers are making fair demands. Production for new seasons of Reservation Dogs and Dark Winds have wrapped, but other projects could experience delays because of the demonstrations. The Native American and Indigenous Writers Committee is planning to have a demonstration outside of Disney Studios in Burbank, California on Wednesday, June 7th. A new Washington state law is mirroring a program first initiated by the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. The law, which was signed last week by Governor Jay Inslee, authorizes the use of dental health therapists statewide. This program was previously available, but was only authorized on tribal lands and to tribal patients. Now, dental health therapists will be able to help a wider range of people, particularly those who live in rural communities. Director of the Swinomish Dental Clinic, Rachel Hogan, welcomed the news. She said due to the program, 70% of its dental providers are now Native American. Hogan compared that to less than 1% of Native dental providers that exist nationwide. Similar laws have been passed in Oregon, Minnesota, Maine, Vermont, and Arizona. Well, congratulations are pouring in for the 18-year-old winner of American Idol. Iam Thongi, who is Samoan, Tongan, and Irish, was crowned the winner of season 21 on Sunday night. He first went viral during his audition when he honored his late father, Rodney. After that was posted to social media, it became the most viewed video in the show's history. Before the finale, Iam returned to the community he grew up in Kahuku, Hawaii. He was celebrated by thousands during his homecoming, with many noting that his family was forced to leave Oahu because of rising housing costs. Aside from bragging rights and bringing new visibility to the Polynesian community, Iam is also taking home $250,000 in prize money and a contract with Hollywood Records. In South America, Indigenous people from a small village are in a court battle against a gold mine over land rights. ICT senior producer Vincent Moniz has this report.
One of the smallest villages in Guyana is working to retain its ancestral territory that they say miners have raided for gold. Carib Nation descendants from the Chinese landing community have seen their land base shrink as digging continues. A local businessman and Canadian company Alario Gold Corporation both claim ownership of an operation that spans 3,400 acres. Though the village secured its land title in 1976, they are now banned from it, and the community, it faces contaminated water from mercury.
It's like a part of us taken away, and it's been destroyed to some extent, knowing that we will never get back whatever been removed and whatever poisonous substance been left there. We will have to deal with it. It's hard, really hard. And it hurt me, as a leader, sometimes to go there and see the things that are happening. It really pains me.
The Caribbean Court of Justice ruled in 2017 that the Amerindian Act did not give any authority to stop work or granting mining permits. This law states that permission is needed from an indigenous community before mining can take place in their territory. In 2021, the village filed a lawsuit arguing the government never had the authority to issue mining permits for any of its land. Michael McGarrell, an indigenous map specialist, says the permits are based on bad data that now blocks the use of tribal resources.
And over the years, what we have been doing, we have been the stewards of those forests, just taking only what we need. And I think this is something that people need to understand. As indigenous people, we take only what we need because we know we'll have to go back there to get more again. There has been a change in terms of how people treat our forests, because they go to the source of things and they take everything. After that, what happens?
The country recently suspended issuing new permits as it starts to look at the damage the old permits allowed to be done to riverbanks and wildlife. In Bismarck, North Dakota, Vincent Moniz, ICT News.
And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. The series America's Hidden Stories on the Smithsonian Channel is on its third season. It shares secrets from buried stories in our nation's history. On Monday, May 29th, it will dive into the unsolved murders of the Osage people in the 1920s. Here to share more is executive producer Anna Davies and program director for the White Hair Memorial Osage Learning Center, Tara Damron. Anna, let's dive in here. This episode follows the story of David Bishop. Tell us about him and his journey.
David Bishop is an Osage tribal member, and we were connected with him by Smithsonian Institution. We were talking to Smithsonian Channel about making this documentary, and we wanted to work with an Osage filmmaker to tell the story in the right way. So we were connected with David. He took us on an incredible journey to explore that story, which was actually a very personal one for him, because Osage families are almost all connected to the events of what happened during the oil boom and the murders and mysterious deaths that took place there. Very tragically, David passed away a couple of weeks ago, and we are completely shocked and still devastated by his loss. And so he, of course, would be here to speak for the film, but he can't be. So Tara has she appears in the documentary, and is a big part of it. So that's, she's going to hopefully help us answer some of your questions. But yes, David was an incredible filmmaker, and the film is an amazing legacy for him.
Tara, I'm very curious if you can tell us about the role that you played in this documentary.
Sure. So we were contacted, as you said, by Anna's team, and they were looking specifically for information about David's great-grandmother, Odell Rivard Denoya Bighorse. She was an Osage original Alati, and the family story that David and his sister, had grown up with, they were starting to question that because of David Grand's book, and then Scorsese's movie that's going to come out, which details the Reign of Terror. Focuses on essentially the Kyle family and Henry Roan and Charles Whitehorn, but there were so many other mysterious deaths of Osages that were never investigated during that time. So this story is a personal one for David. So we worked with the National Archives in Fort Worth, and they were very generous as far as providing resources from the guardianship and probate files of David's ancestor. And then we also had, a couple of genealogists, our research assistant and genealogists on staff that, worked to get the funeral records and genealogy records. So it was a fun project to work on for us. So we just hope that, what we're able to find shed some light to David and to his sister, for their family. That's the thing that we like to do is hopefully it provided some answers and some more information, and maybe more questions. But that's the thing about research. You just never know what you're going to find, once you start looking into all those records.
Anna, we know that the film by Martin Scorsese, Killers of the Flower Moon, is getting major buzz right now due to its premiere in France. How is this project different than that film?
So obviously I haven't had the chance to see the Scorsese movie yet, but what I understand is that it follows the content of the David Grann book quite closely, and what that story tells is very much it focuses on the 6 or so murders which did lead to an investigation which those murders were solved. They were all part of the same conspiracy by one particular or led by one particular individual with other conspirators. But David Grann in his book acknowledges in the final chapters this was just the tip of the iceberg. There were so many other unexplained deaths. So what we wanted to do with the documentary and what David wanted to do was peel back some of those additional layers. And so we reached out to another member of the tribe who'd actually done some of his own family research, and he talks to David in the documentary about his grandfather's death, which was almost certainly a murder. These things are difficult to prove, as Tara is, she knows more about that than I do, but it's very clear that pretty much every Osage family was impacted by this criminality, and also the financial exploitation that was completely sanctioned. It was like enabled by the federal government. And, that was something I think, well, that may be touched on in Killers of the Flower Moon. I'm sure it will be, but we wanted to really put that front and center so that it was about the theft as well as the violence that happened. So we're trying to sort of widen the lens a little bit on that story and just provide extra context and hopefully be a good companion piece to the Scorsese film, which will, I'm sure, be incredible.
Tara, I'd love to ask you what the reaction has been of the tribal community with all of this buzz around the Osage murders.
Certainly. So I think for Osages, the film itself is going to be very emotional because we as Osages have grown up with this. We have all of these family stories and these family connections of that. And so I, watching, just for me personally, watching the trailer, that was pretty difficult because, and I'm going to quote my mom here. She and I were talking, and she said, it's one thing for us, to hear about it, to read about it, but I think to actually see it portrayed on screen and in such a way, that all these people. From the guardians to the bureau to police departments, undertakers, all the way up to DC, the federal government, like Anna was saying, all of that was allowed to happen to us, and so I think there's a bit of nervousness, there's a bit of anxiety, but there's, I think, cautiously optimistic. But I think it is definitely going to be for Osages because this just wasn't talked about, and it's only been within, since the release of David Grann's book. So there's going to be a lot of emotions, I think, that's going to come with us, and hopefully some healing,
Well, Anna Davies and Tara Damron, thank you. On Monday, states in the U.S. reached what's being called a historic agreement to save the Colorado River. It provides drinking water for 40 million people across 7 states and at least 30 tribal nations. ICT regular contributor John Tahsuda joins us once again with more. Welcome back, John.
Thanks for having me again.
Start us off with sharing how we got to this crucial place to begin with.
So it's a long-running story. And goes all the way back to the early part of the 20th century, when they were first having to deal with all the users that were developing then, users of the Colorado River water. A lot of agriculture at that time, but you had new states such as Arizona and Nevada that had entered the Union in addition to California, which obviously had entered in decades before. They were all using this water significantly, and they had to have an agreement on how to do that. As with water agreements, you have to first figure out how much water there is, and the problem starts there. They had faulty calculations as to how much water was usable out of the river in those days, and everything since then has been, built on sort of this foundation of errors, and just compounded the problem. Of course, over the years, California, particularly Southern California, which is a heavy user of the water, had expanded population significantly. Cities like Phoenix and Las Vegas, have grown by millions in the intervening 100 years or so. So you have all those populations, and you have the continued expansion of agricultural use. Imperial County in California alone uses well over 1 million acre feet out of the river every year. But those are important pieces of sort of the national agricultural economy because for our winter months, some people estimate as much as 75% of our vegetables nationwide come out of that part of the country. So, it continues to be important economically and agriculturally, in addition to the continued expansion of population in that part of the country.
In the agreement that was reached on Monday, what did the ending negotiations look like between the states, and what does it mean for tribes?
Well, the significant part of it were the lower basin states, California, Nevada, and Arizona, and particularly California and Arizona. They're the big heavy users of the water as it reaches there. So they agreed to significant cuts voluntarily to avoid having the federal government impose cuts. So it sort of saved face for everybody there in a certain way. You cannot underestimate the short-term impact of the last year of extraordinary snow and rainfall and what that made the deal to come together. That sort of alleviated the short-term pain so they could get over the next couple of years. In 2026, there's going to be a complete renegotiation of the allocations, negotiations between the states, et cetera. So, a significant part of that will be the tribes. Again, 100 years ago in the 1920s, when they were allocating the water out, and not only did they miscalculate the amount of water that was in the river, but they completely ignored the tribal rights. And so now, 100 years later, those are a significant part of that negotiation as well.
You just mentioned that this agreement only lasts until the end of 2026. Do you think that states and tribes are already thinking about the end of the agreement and what comes next?
Certainly. I'm sure there's a sigh of relief to get through the next couple of years, but there's a lot of work ahead. California and Arizona have to find ways to cut millions of acre feet out of their water usage so that enough water can remain in the river to be usable. And you have to remember, it's not just water for population use, for agricultural use. There's significant hydroelectric facilities on that river as well. They have to have a certain amount of water flow as well. That electricity serves millions of people in that part of the country.
I want to move to Washington very quickly, where lawmakers are racing to make negotiations on extending the government's borrowing authority. In those early conversations, are there any major sticking points that would affect Indian country so far?
Well, I would say not specifically. The way the deal is structured and the way they often structure these is they take sort of really high level numbers and make cuts from those and leave it to the administration to figure out how they're going to implement those. And so, the tough questions, once you get a deal struck and there's a certain level of cuts required, then it becomes the question of where the administration wants to impose that pain. Where do they do that? So, my position has always been that Indian country, frankly, is a very small part of the overall federal budget, but the impacts to the daily lives of Indian people, and particularly those on reservations that are heavily dependent upon the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Service, the impact of cuts to them is significant and dramatic, and can affect their health and welfare on a daily basis. And so, when they make those cuts, and when I have been in that position before, I've always made the argument that the impact to human lives is significant. The impact to the federal budget is minor. So hopefully they keep that in mind as they go forward, and the administration will look for cuts from other places of the budget, which of course everybody hates to see cuts to their budgets, et cetera, but may not have the same level of impact on human lives.
Well, John Tahsuda, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Nika Bartu-Smith is a reporter at _News and ICT. Her reporting largely covers the Pacific Northwest, where she's based out of Portland. Nika joins us now virtually with the latest information on her stories. Hi, Nika. Welcome to the ICT Newscast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You recently filed a story called A Journey of Healing. Tell us about the mental health services in Washington State.
Yeah, so I first learned about this resource a couple months ago before I started in this role, and I was really excited to figure out how to cover it. So the 988 Suicide and Crisis Hotline just released a Native and Strong lifeline that is run entirely by Native tribal crisis counselors for Native folks across the state of Washington. And so in approaching this topic of mental health, I thought it was really important to meet people where they were at in terms of making a space where they felt comfortable sharing. And I was really excited that many of the counselors talked about their own mental health journey and how important that is in terms of working with other folks, of kind of being able to talk about their own lived experiences as well. We also talked a lot about the need to destigmatize mental health conversations across the board, but really specifically in Native communities. And part of that is having people that have that firsthand understanding. So it's a resource that so far they've had over 1,200 callers. It's been open for less than 6 months, and a lot of what people are calling for is really asking for a cultural connection across the state of Washington.
You also recently covered a story about climate change and federal aid. What is the overview of that?
Yeah, so I'm kind of new to beginning to delve into an environmental reporting position, and I'm really excited about it. So in the piece that you mentioned, I got to highlight 2 examples in the Pacific Northwest of ways in which Indigenous knowledge is beginning to really become central to conversations about environmental justice. So 2 new environmental justice centers just are opening. One is at Portland State University and the other is at the University of Washington. And they will be research centers really run in coordination with tribal communities and thinking about the impacts of climate change and how we mitigate those effects and think about communities most impacted. And then I also got to chat with Derek Kimball, who's a Klamath and Modoc tribal member and an Indigenous fire practitioner down in Northern California and Southern Oregon. And he has been working with a crew to educate other fire agencies about these different practices and how important that is.
As I mentioned in my opening, you are a shared reporter with _ and ICT. What exactly does that partnership look like?
Yeah, so I work out of the _ office based in Portland. So at _ News, we're a small nonprofit newsroom covering Indigenous communities across the Pacific Northwest, hence a really natural partnership with ICT. So in my role, I'm a shared reporter, which means my work is published and assigned by both agencies, and I have an editor at each organization. And this collaborative role that I am in, I think, has really helped not only underscore grow our coverage, but also ICT gain kind of a foothold in the Pacific Northwest and have somebody on the ground here to do more coverage in this area. And so along with my role, ICT and underscore also do a lot of content sharing and really treat it as a chance to pool resources and figure out the best possible way we can cover Native communities. I really think the future of journalism as a whole is going to have to be more collaborative and less competitive. And so in the role that I'm in, I feel like I get to have a part in shaping that, which is really exciting.
Nika, I'm really curious about the stories that you are working on right now. What stories can we expect soon, both on underscorenews.com and ICT?
Yeah, so I have a couple in the works that I'm really excited about. I'm working on one with one of my coworkers at Underscore that's following along and looking at the MMIP crisis and some promises that have been made in Oregon about creating different systems to do a better job at tracking and responding when missing and murdered Indigenous people cases are reported. And so that's kind of been an investigative piece that we've been able to dive into that I'm really excited. And then down the line, I'm thinking about more environmental reporting. I will be doing some reporting on both the Klamath Dam removal and then some things happening with Elk River mining up in kind of the Montana and BC area and the impact that that is having on tribes in those areas.
Well, Nika Bartu-Smith, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.